Mic check.
Check, check. Hello.
Okay. So, um, hello everybody. Welcome to today's session. My name is Neetu Chen. I'm lead product manager at USAA, and I would like to thank our sponsors, Product Pad, uh, Product Marketing, and Sequent for making this conference possible. And thanks a lot to our speaker, Andrew Miller, who is today ready to share on how to get into continuous discovery and make it more efficient. He is a product manager at RealPage, and I would let Andrew tell more about himself and his learnings. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much. Hey, welcome everyone. So, shifting into continuous discovery, 1 year in the making. So, this is going to be a story starting from last year, 19Q4. So, first things first, well done. You came to the right talk, I hope, I think. We'll find out soon. I am Andrew Miller. I'm a product manager at RealPage. I've been in software in various capacities for over a decade now, and I've been doing product management for about 3 years. I got into product by way of engineering and UX design. It's an interesting space because everyone has a different path into product oftentimes, so it's kind of nice to hear people's paths into it sometimes. So first things first, some non-goals for this talk. What I'm not going to try to do is give you a playbook, so to speak. I'm also not going to try to tell you what does work and what doesn't work all of the time. If you're a product manager, you already know this type of work is way too contextual for that. So what is in scope, I'm going to try to give you an honest and a raw account of my experience and my team's experience shifting into continuous discovery. And I'm going to do it in kind of a chronological narrative form. So let me break this down a little bit. So discovery, what do I mean by that? I'm talking about product discovery. I'm talking about the work stream for your team that's focused on generating ideas, validating ideas, and also testing those ideas before you build them. This is a highly collaborative, highly cross-functional process. So one way to think about it is that product discovery is primarily about validating ideas and designs, and less so about solving problems that don't exist yet, solving problems that you think might come up in the future. Um, and actually, Anthony Murphy had a great response to this post. If you don't follow Anthony yet, go do it. He's awesome. He's a friend of mine. He actually says, I might adjust that further and say it can be about gaining confidence that you're moving in the right direction. I sometimes wonder if the word validate is too strong here. I think that's a great contrasting viewpoint. What I like about thinking of it as validating ideas is that validating is very binary, right? Like you give it a thumbs up or you give it a thumbs down. It forces you to make a decision. Is this idea validated or not? And that can be helpful. To Anthony's point, sometimes, and this has popped up many times in the past year with my team, some ideas are just simply hard to give a thumbs up to with a ton of confidence. It's hard to just say this is fully validated. So in those instances, maybe adopting Anthony's recommendation of what's our confidence gauge on this direction is a good alternative. So continuous, what do I mean by that? I just mean that it's ongoing, right? You're not validating ideas and then dropping discovery altogether. You're kind of always continually discovering. Think continuous integration, continuous delivery on the engineering side. You don't want to shut everything down when it's time to merge code and deploy it. Likewise, you don't want to shut discovery down just because you validated a good idea. You want to keep it going and continually discover things. So shifting, I use this word in particular because changing process can be hard. It can be a little bit risky. It can require some behavior change and some ongoing maintenance. The way that we've gone about it is in a very incremental form, so as not to disrupt momentum. And I think the reality is that most of us probably work within existing organizations and have existing processes in place. So it's only some of the times that we're standing up a process from scratch. So more likely, we're probably incrementally shifting our processes based on what already exists. I actually posed this question to my network as well. I said, how do you introduce process change, measure its impact, and maintain that change and drive adoption? There were some nice responses. So Oliver said, start with the why. Moshe, who's actually presenting in another talk right now, he's awesome. He said, start with the why, but keep asking it again and again. I think that's a great point. Lori there up on the top, she says, start with the why and make sure you get input from your team. That's also great. And Martin says, connect the change with problems and back it up with numbers and make sure the right people care about it. All of these responses kind of got me to thinking, it's sort of interesting that, changing process is not all that different at some level from just building product in general. So, right, start with the why, be iterative, back it up with some data if you can, get your stakeholder input, your team's input. New releases need to be maintained and adoption needs to be driven. And by the way, ta-da, this is the meta moment of the talk. Brought to you by our sponsors. Thank you very much. Sequent, Pragmatic Institute, and ProdPad. Thank you for sponsoring Dallas Product Camp. Anyways, so moving along, what is this story I'm going to tell? So I'm breaking it up by quarters, starting last year in Q4, and then I'm going to focus on each individual quarter all the way up to Q3 of this year. So in Q4 of 2019, what did my product and engineering organization look like roughly? We had leadership over there on the left, a handful of UXers, a couple product managers, and this sort of large engineering team. One of the things you'll notice is this diagram doesn't completely do it justice, but in a sense, we were a little bit siloed by role. What kind of happened is we'd have ideas over there kind of forming on the left-hand side. We'd sort of sketch them out and discover them. A PM would own a particular feature, and then different features would get tossed over to the same engineering team. So you can see the quote from the engineering lead. I actually got that quote this morning from Jeremiah. He's awesome. He said it was chaos. So his particular role in this arrangement was a bit tough because he was responsible for kind of taking in all of the different features that were being built at once and sort of making sure that his team was able to take all of that work. So what did our process kind of look like? So we would start with an idea and we would, do discovery work on it. It kind of gets back up to that LinkedIn post earlier. Sometimes we would think out ahead and maybe kind of design a bit beyond, the first release, right? And so we would kind of think through a feature and then say, hey, engineering, get over here, let's talk about this. And then there was this sort of section in the middle where we were being agile, right? Let's iterate together and let's talk about how we can do this. So we would do some agile iteration and then we would kind of kick it off and they would sort of own it from there and ship it. While we were in it, we definitely told ourselves that we were being very agile, and it felt like we were being agile until we kind of zoomed out and really looked at what was going on. And you can see it's a little bit more linear than that. So it's not all bad. There were definitely good things that were coming out of this. So a couple pros: we got really good at building features. That's a good thing. We got really good at shipping. Very good at shipping. That was also excellent. On the negative side, a couple cons. So this arrangement was a bit stressful on certain engineering roles, like the engineering lead, for example. It was a little bit hard to turn the ship, so to speak, once it got going, because by the time we were sort of being agile, we had already committed to quite a bit. So it was hard to turn the ship. We were sort of operating as a feature factory a little bit. And we were also mostly using output-focused goals, tasking groups with features, build this feature, and so on. So moving into 2020 Q1, a couple changes took place. And these were sort of the larger lifts in terms of organizational design. We introduced cross-functional product teams and we introduced team charters. A little bit of context there. So cross-functional product teams, the general idea is we wanted to empower our teams with autonomy. We wanted to reduce stress on the engineering leads. And for our team charters, we wanted, the purpose of those documents is to align the teams internally amongst themselves, also to coordinate the teams across each other. And I'm quoting our design director, Miles, here. I love this line. He says, the team charter, it's kind of the contract between the executives and the team. So it's a living document that serves as the kind of internal broadcasting of what is this team's focus, what are we going to be achieving, and so on. So contrasting with the previous diagram of our organization structure, this is what we started to shift into in Q1. So we still had leadership, UX director, product management director over there on the left. And then you're seeing that there's now two different teams, and the engineers are kind of split across them, right? So this is a little bit more of our autonomous product team. So the team is made up of, we have a product manager, a UX or design lead, and an engineering lead, and then a number of engineers, 3 to maybe 5, a QA engineer, and then there's also a couple new roles introduced here. So business analyst, if they're available, and also account managers. So every product team has oh yeah, Taylor, I just seeing your comment. Autonomy, crazy, I know, right? Every product team has an account manager. So that's super helpful because we talk to our customers a lot as PMs and also in the UX seat, but the account managers are talking to the customers constantly. So it's very helpful to have that voice into the mix. And what did this start to do for our process? So it's always a little bit hard. I actually saw John Cutler made a post about this on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, and the discussion sort of focused on the drawing itself. To be fair, it's always hard to kind of fully capture collaboration dynamics in a simplified two-dimensional model. But what I'm trying to point out here is basically time is left to right. So we started to have a discovery track and a delivery track. Discovery had its own sort of series of iterations and loops. Delivery had its own sort of series of iterations and loops. And then there was also iterations and loops between the two of them. So the main point is that there's lots of opportunities for cross-pollination. There's lots of opportunities to share knowledge and iterate together. Here's an example of our team charter. So my team is called Team Pretzel. And at a high level, the kinds of things we have in our charter is we have a mission statement, which is the kind of the top level, sort of most vague part of the charter. And then as you go down, it gets a little bit more specific. So we also have a statement of our approach, and finally our focus. The focus is kind of at the jobs to be done level. So that one's pretty interesting. You can see some examples. We want our customers to be able to publish content. We want them to be able to view and understand the results of the content, and so on and so forth. So these are the sort of things that, someone in leadership or an executive can look at this and get a quick understanding of what this team is really after. It's also a way for us to compare and contrast team focuses. So as I mentioned earlier, these are very much living documents, right? This has changed at least a little bit every quarter, and will continue to evolve. If it's not evolving, then we're probably not learning, we're probably not doing something right. So some outcomes for the changes that took place in Q1. First is teams started setting their own roadmaps with lots of input, of course, from necessary stakeholders. That was a big deal. So teams really got to own what they were going to be working on, which was nice. Product management, UX, and engineering, they really started collaborating more at a strategic level. And not to say that they weren't collaborating prior, but just a lot more of that at a strategic level. And there's all sorts of huge wins that come out of that, right? Like you can start really gauging business value user value and feasibility very early in the process, and that can kind of get baked into the roadmap. We also just started getting more ideas from more people from various roles. Um, you know, having business analysts and account managers on the team really helped facilitate input of more ideas from various roles. And it's not to say that various roles weren't already providing ideas, because they were, but we didn't quite have the structure in place to catch those ideas in a meaningful way. So sometimes they would fall between the cracks, and our team structure has really helped correct for that a lot. So moving on to Q2. Some changes that were introduced in Q2. The first thing is we introduced dual track agile, which sort of formally or formalized our discovery track. We also introduced outcome focused goals as compared to output focused goals. And lastly, we introduced team KPIs and metrics. There was a lot of process change that took place in this quarter. It was really fun. So some context there. If you want to have continuous discovery, you need to kind of separate discovery from delivery, right? So formally separating that out has really served as the kind of process infrastructure that has allowed us to move in that direction. Outcome-focused goals. So, don't give the team a solution and say, build this. Don't predefine the solution. Rather, give them an outcome, something to achieve, and let the team figure out how to get there. We started really focusing on working with our leadership and our higher ups to figure out what the outcome was or is that we want to achieve each quarter. And we usually have some rough idea of what the solution is. You need to have some idea, and that kind of maps more to a vision, which ties to the team charter, right? So we have kind of these vague outlines of the direction we're going in and our focus, but the very specific solution, we don't necessarily predefine that. We focus on the outcome and let the team figure it out through discovery. Also, if you're going to have outcome-focused goals, which I recommend, you have to be able to measure it. So these last two are kind of, they're sort of both required at the same time. So we needed metrics in place before we could measure the success of our outcome. It's sort of tough to have outcome goals if you can't monitor the success of them. So this is a screenshot of our discovery track. It's nothing crazy. It's a Kanban board, right? We're all probably familiar with Kanbans, but just to highlight, it's its own Kanban. It's separate from what engineering would normally focus on in their delivery track. So these aren't engineering tickets, they're discovery tickets. And I'm going to focus in on a couple columns here because the previous shot's probably too hard to read. But these 4 columns are maybe the most important. So we have on deck, we have in progress, and then we have something that might look a little bit different from a traditional delivery Kanban. We have a learnings column and a validated column. So as ideas, these are all, also I should mention, you can kind of see it there. These are all written in user story form, or at least they're supposed to be. So we don't always adhere to every rule that we try to put in place. That's another thing I'll talk about later. But they're intended to be written in user story form. So as user stories flow through discovery, after they're finished being in progress, they either land in validated or they will land in learnings. They don't go from in progress to learnings to validated. So that's one thing that's a little bit different. Validated means that we like it, basically. Or in Anthony's words, we have high confidence around this idea. We've validated it somehow. The learnings column, a user story will land there if we're not ready to move on it yet. Either there's something about the concept, something about the design that we want to iterate again. We haven't quite figured it out yet. And that's also a success, right? So we'll put it in the learnings column And when we do that, what's important is you want to always create another user story, probably put it on deck, that's sort of trying to build on that learning. So that's such an important part of our discovery track, is capturing our learnings. Interesting thing here to point out, excuse me, is at least presently in this screenshot, we have 5 user stories in the validated column and 23 in learnings. So quick comparison there, right? It's like this process really allows us to make decisions on what we want to build and what we want to move on. And we do end up de-scoping quite a bit. And that's good, because it just means that we're continually iterating and refining our concepts before we make the full kind of productionalized engineering investment. This is a screenshot of, so if you were to click into one of these discovery cards, you would see a template like this. This is how we start every discovery card. There's a couple common questions that we want to make sure we address while we're doing discovery. So why are we doing it? We should have some idea of how this user story aligns with our charter. This one's usually pretty easy, unless we're just way off base, but it's a quick gut check, right? It's like, is this even something our team should be focusing on? Does it align with our charter? What's our idea of the value it adds to the customer? What's our idea of the value? In our case, we're in multifamily housing, so we have customers and we have residents that use our product. What's our idea of the value it adds to the resident? And finally, what's the value it adds to our business? So a handful of value statements there. And then you can see here, we have a section for design assets. So any sort of wireframing, any sort of brainstorming, any prototypes that are being created, any sort of user research, we want to start loading that up here. And likewise, it's interesting, you can see design is right next to engineering. They're kind of working in tandem. Any sort of technical research that's taking place, feasibility analysis, costing, tech specs, tech spikes, all of the output of those tasks we want to document here. And then lastly, if it winds up in the learnings column, we want to capture those learnings. Even if it winds up in the validated column, we probably want to capture the learnings as to why we like it. Oh, I took a note here for me. I do have a tutorial for how to set our discovery track up in Notion. If that's a tool that you use, if you're interested in that, just ping me. I'm happy to send that tutorial over. So this is a screenshot of, I mentioned earlier, outcome-focused goals versus output. I wanted to visualize that and contrast those really quickly. So in 20Q1, the previous quarter, this is an example of an output-focused goal that we worked on. Satisfaction pulse model surveys V1. The details of that aren't really what's important here. What's important is we're saying, hey, this is a thing that we want to build. We have a pretty clear idea of the solution, and we're going to build a V1 of that solution. Contrast that with some of the types of goals we started introducing in Q2. Increase the percentage of properties that create a poll each week to 3.27%. There's some sort of industry jargon in this and company jargon, but you can kind of probably tell the difference here, right? We're focusing on a metric. There's references to percentages and a very specific outcome. 3.27% is what we're after. So we started doing a lot more of these in Q2. And this goal has really no reference or detail around what the solution is. How are we going to do that? It's not baked into the goal. The idea is we set the goal and let the team figure it out. So lastly, if we are going to have goals like this, we need to be able to measure them. So metrics and KPIs, right? On our team, it does take some time. It's an investment to build these out. You know, there's usually a cycle of building out the first version of the metric, and then we'll regroup, maybe kind of look at the logic in the SQL, make sure that we're measuring what we think we're measuring, make sure there's not any sort of quirks in the system that are resulting in the data being different than what we think it is. And then we might take another cycle or two to kind of nail down the metric. So it's a little bit of investment each time we want to build out a new metric, but they keep paying dividends. So once we do it, we can continually refer to them on and on. So this is just one example of a metric. This is actually the one that ties to this goal. So this is % of our customers that create a poll each week. You can kind of see ahead. This is part of the story, what happens over time through this process. But yeah, so at this point, we have a portfolio of metrics that we've built out. So there's anywhere from 6 to maybe 9 that we can pull up at a given point, and we're pretty confident on them. So it's really valuable to have. So some outcomes of these process changes in Q2 is, like I mentioned earlier, we were able to descope lots of our ideas during discovery. That's so valuable. It's so much engineering time that we didn't spend building something that wasn't quite what we wanted. We were able to figure that out in discovery. We also started having several iterations on an idea before we built them, and that kind of relates to this first one. We're refining our ideas before the investment. And another really cool thing that started happening is engineering started building prototypes on their own before design, right? Like, so design was already making prototypes. That's been part of our design practice for a while. But it wasn't that common for engineering to build a prototype before design. So we call these feasibility prototypes. And it's just so cool because there might be instances in which, there's a concept we really want to get some movement on in discovery, and maybe my designer's plate's full. He's working on something really important. He just doesn't have bandwidth. So if there's an engineer that's available and they want to jump into discovery, we can kind of say, hey, here's the general idea of what we're after. Can you just try to see if this is possible? Can you spend a week and see if you can build something remotely close to this out? It doesn't matter what it looks like, doesn't matter if it's pretty, but can you functionally do it? And most of the time we end up figuring out how to do it in that week or so. And that sort of becomes an input into design as well. So you can kind of see we're really getting away from this linear design to engineering flow, and we're starting from anywhere. We're starting from design. We're starting from engineering. We're starting from account management, and they're all kind of inputting into each other, and it's much more cyclical. Some lessons learned for this quarter. This is a screenshot of a post I made on Medium. I'm going to focus in on this list here at the bottom. So the first lesson that I learned is, if you're going to make these changes, repeat the KPI often. Being in the product management seat, I'm constantly thinking about this stuff. I'm checking metrics daily, at least multiple times a day, often. And I made the assumption that in this quarter that everyone else was thinking about them as much as I was, and that's just not the case. And that's also totally fine, because everyone's busy, everyone's working on a million things. Everyone doesn't have the same priorities I do. So repeating the KPI often, weekly at least, daily if possible, be a broken record. It's very helpful. It helps keep the team aligned. Number 2, tech spikes, tech specs, technical research in general. That's part of discovery. It's less of we have a design, now hand it over to engineering, and they'll spec it out and then build it. The technical research is part of the costing, part of the feasibility analysis, and that's in the discovery track. So we don't make those engineering, put that in the delivery track. Number 3, templatize your process and update it often. This kind of speaks to the iterative process change idea from earlier. So if you're using a tool that allows you to create templates, do it if you haven't already, and just be ready to update them. If you create a template or kind of a rule or a guideline heuristic in your process, be ready to update that. Um, we use Notion, and it's nice for me because I can make a small adjustment in, for example, the discovery card template. And it's an easy way for me to introduce a tiny little process change without, hopefully, overwhelming my team. Because I can just add a little thing in the template. I may not even have to have a meeting about it. I can just kind of monitor it, see if it gets adopted, ask a couple people if they like it, and so on. That's kind of part of the way that I get user input is I'll test these things out and see if they catch traction sometimes. Learn from your ideas, don't invalidate them. That's a reference back to the Kanban board where we have that learnings column followed by the validated column. The first way we set that up is the learnings column was called invalidated, and the next column was called validated. It's kind of funny in hindsight because it's like, duh, don't invalidate an idea. That's like super brutal. Like you don't want people to feel bad. But what ended up happening was, we would go through our discovery process, and if we weren't satisfied with the results, we were kind of like, I guess we want to invalidate this idea. That feels really bad, and no one's happy about that. So it's a one-word change, but it really made all the difference. Focusing on the positive, which is the learning, right? So yeah, learn, don't invalidate. Number 5, communication helps. Being rigid doesn't. As we were making these changes, we needed to communicate a lot about them. I needed to communicate a lot about them. I still need to continue communicating, and having this idea that being very rigid to the process change is the right thing to do, that's not the right idea. You need to stay flexible. I need to stay flexible in the product management seat. I saw a post on this. I think it was maybe another John Cutler post, actually, but I think the post was rigidness is one of the top collaboration anti-patterns that he's observed. And I totally agree. You got to stay flexible. You got to stay open to shifting. So moving on to last quarter, 20Q3, the changes we introduced in this quarter. Really, there's two big ones: experimentation and design sprints. So the idea behind experimentation is we really wanted a way to quantitatively validate our ideas. Test each idea, watch the metrics, see if it's getting us the results we want to validate it. Design sprint, this is built on the Google design sprints. We wanted a kind of a way to have a short burst of a bunch of qualitative input to inform our broader vision, right? I'm not going to have time to go into too much detail on the design sprint. There's a book on it. I actually have not read that book, but our director of product management has run several design sprints. So he helped us out a ton with the design sprint, and it was a blast. So I highly recommend it. So experimentation. This is another version of our discovery Kanban board, but it's just experiments. You can see all the yellow tags that say experiment on them. So basically, we have the same process for experimentation. We come up with ideas, we move them into in progress. They either go into the learnings column, or they get validated, or we just bail on them if we decide not to do it. It's very similar. It's just a more specific, or maybe not more specific, but it's a slightly different discovery approach. And you can see that here. So again, if you were to click into one of these, this is the starting template for experiments. So we want to figure out, before we run an experiment, what's the channel we're going to be experimenting through. For us, this is one of two channels today. CIO, that's shorthand for customer IO. That's our email platform that we're integrated with. Pindo, many of you may know the tool. It does a lot of things. It's an analytics tool. It helps with onboarding. They're kind of a Swiss Army knife of product features. So those are currently the two channels we experiment through. So we just need to figure out which channel are we going to choose. Every experiment needs to have a KPI that we're going to monitor to measure the success of that experiment. If you don't have a KPI in place, it's really not worth running the experiment because you're not going to know if it worked or not. We need to design the experiment, and then usually experiments have some type of asset. So that might be images, or it might be the KPI itself, links to Pindo, links to CIO. If we're creating some sort of ad hoc segmentation that we need to use, which is very frequent in experimentation because we're doing unscalable things, we'll link to those segments and so on. We have a pre-launch checklist. This is largely for kind of internal coordination. And then we have a learnings and outcomes section. So did the metric move? Did it go up? Did it go yes? What happened that was unexpected? What can we learn from this? Another interesting thing that's come out of this process is kind of figuring out what are the meaningfully different roles that are necessary to successfully run experimentation for us. So we need some sort of technician, someone owning the technical side, the implementation of the experiment. We need someone to design the experiment. And that's not just the, kind of the UI of the experiment. It's also what's the segment, what's the goal of the experiment. That's also part of the design. We need someone to analyze the outcome. If there's already a metric in place that's pretty obvious, cool. We might not need an analyst on it, but oftentimes our experiments might not fit perfectly into an existing metric, so we are going to have to invest a little bit of time in analysis. For us, we need a copywriter. So if there's any copy in the experiment, which there often is, someone has to own that. Copywriting is one of those things for us that if there isn't a clear owner, then it can sort of become a blocker and a bottleneck because we all just kind of throw our hands up like, well, I don't know, let's just say this, and that ends up becoming a problem down the road when we're ready to launch it because we don't want to say the wrong thing and rub a customer the wrong way, right? And for us, the best type of role to be the copywriter in this case is someone on account management because they have the best sort of intuitive insight into what's the right way to phrase things that's going to work for our customers. And lastly, we need a coordinator, someone who is communicating out to other teams and other departments that we're going to run this experiment. We've gotten kind of in some tight spots in the past when we were trying to move super, super fast and break things, where we would launch some experiments that ended up doing really, really well. So everyone was happy in the end, but not everyone was aware of them. So it caught people off guard. And that's just not a good way to go about it. Also, the team kind of came up with some guiding principles around experimentation. This is after we had been doing it for an entire quarter, and I thought this was super interesting. I wanted to share with you guys. So the first is ownership. So if you're involved in an experiment on our team, have ownership over it. Be ready to just take action and move it forward. That's kind of how this stuff needs to work. Also, communication is super important. We need to be aligned internally and with other departments. We want to iterate and innovate. Experimentation for us is about taking what we already have and tweaking it a little bit. We want to iterate on it in an innovative way. Sometimes we can design an experiment that tests a completely new feature. It's totally new concept. We just know that that's a heavier lift. So if possible, we want to reserve that to maybe 20% of experiments. The bulk of them, 80% or so, should really be these little iterations on what already exists. That helps us keep going faster. We want to learn every single week. This is so important too. In general, it's so important for continuous discovery, is some sort of cadence around your learning. Every week is our goal. Even if that learning is, hey, we weren't able to launch an experiment this week because of X, Y, and Z, that's totally fine. As long as we document that, talk about it, figure out how to do it better next week, great. But ideally, we are learning from our experiments, and we can take that and weave it into the next round of tests. We want them to be purposeful. How does this move us toward our goal? How is it relevant, and so on and so forth. And lastly, it's you're not really finishing the process if you don't share the results out. So we need to make sure we're broadcasting our learnings out to other teams and other departments. This is my outcome slide for experimentation. So this is a post I made just celebrating the success of this quarter. So, in Q2, we didn't launch any experiments. And in 1 month of Q3, that happened to be August, we launched 7 experiments. So we went from 0 to 7 in a single month. It was awesome. And that ended up resulting in we beat our KPI record by 260%. It was so great. And it was very much a team effort. Everyone contributed a little bit. Everyone affected the idea, and we iterated a lot really quick, and we found something that worked, and it resonated with our customers, and it just sort of it kind of took off. So this is similar to the principles, but we set a weekly cadence, and what that looks like is we try to ideate on Mondays, build on Tuesdays, launch on Wednesdays. Like, this is super fast, right? But it's possible if we contain our scope enough, and if we really focus on, let's do something that's possible. Let's try not to get too complicated with it. And if we stick to this process, then we still have Thursday and Friday left over. So we use third-party tooling, and that helps us move quick, and it keeps us from having to productionalize anything to run the experiment, which is really helpful. We try to do unscalable things, particularly around segmentation. So if there's not currently a way to segment the test for a given group, we'll figure out how to do it. We'll query our database and export a long list of user IDs and then load those user IDs up into Customer IO or Pindo. We'll do stuff like that all the time, where it's like, we technically can't do this right now, and it definitely is not productionalized, but we can do it this week for this one test. We try to set a cap on pre-launch iterations just for experiments. Trying not to iterate more than 2 times before launching. If you're iterating too much on the experiment, then you're not really getting the value of this type of discovery work. You need to make sure that you're actually launching it so you can actually get some learnings back. But if you're iterating too much, then you're starting to slip into the territory of anticipating what might go right and what might go wrong and making adjustments. Really, just throw it out there and let the customers tell you what's going on. We want to bring stakeholders in early. That's kind of a part of coordination and communication. And we channeled our non-blocking input. What does this one even say? Okay, yeah, if there's non-blocking input, we kind of move that to next week. And we just say, hey, this isn't a blocker. Let's go ahead and move on. I think I'm running out of time, but so in summary, 19Q4, what did we look like? We kind of a little bit looked like a feature factory. We were slightly siloed by role. Q1, we split into autonomous cross-functional teams. We set up team charters. This was a huge lift that our product leadership took on and really opened up a lot of opportunities. In Q2, we set up dual track agile. We introduced outcome-focused goals and team KPIs. And in Q3, we introduced experimentation and design sprints. It's a lot of change that's taken place, and the outcome's been pretty great. I got to be honest with you guys, practicing continuous discovery, in my experience, it's a little bit harder. It requires resting kind of in the mystery, in the unknown, in this sort of ambiguous state. We don't always know what we're going to be doing in 3 months. But, and I bolded this here, the payoff is so much bigger. It's harder, but it's more fun. So that's also another thing, is we have to be a little bit more focused. We have to communicate a lot more. It's more fun. The payoff is bigger. And the last thing that I'll leave you guys with, you can go read this post maybe in more detail later, but another thing that we've kind of learned throughout this experience is that there's this really interesting relationship between whether you're using output focused goals or outcome focused goals, and how that relates to how fully defined your solution is. Um, I'll cut to the chase. Basically, this is where we live down here, this bottom right green corner. We use outcome focused goals with a loosely defined solution. It feels a little bit scary because we don't always know what we're going to be doing, but it has the highest potential value. So with that, thank you very much. Would love to connect with any of you. Feel free to reach out, and appreciate you joining. I don't know. Is there any questions? Were you paying attention to the feedback?
Yes, there are some questions, Andrew, and I can start on them if you want.
Yeah, that'd be
So,
great. Yes, please.
okay. So Ben Lake has a question on what motivated the desire to change at the beginning of Q1 2020. Was it top down or was it bottom up?
Yeah. So that was largely that change was taken on by our product leadership. So head of product, product management director, design director, and also some of our engineer leaders as well. There was a couple things. So one of the motivations is just it was too much for that lead engineering role. It was just too much to handle all of that. Another thing is we had been talking about making that change for, gosh, 2 years plus. It's something we'd been talking about forever. Um, Interestingly, the timing of that shift coincided with our acquisition by RealPage. So there was a lot happening all at once, and we just kind of ripped the band-aid off and did it. That's sort of what happened.
It's interesting. Yeah, I was thinking at my company too. We've been talking about it. We never do anything. Your
Yes.
practical examples help a lot.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you. So the other question is from Michelle Smith. When do you involve the actual business stakeholders, if you do, or end users in your discovery process? Do you have them directly engage with the whole delivery team, or just flow the information through the business analyst or some other representative?
Gotcha. Yeah. When do we involve them? So I've told the story in quarterly cadences, which sort of speaks to how our organization is works. We very much do quarterly planning. That's a big part of how we work. Um, Business stakeholders, I would say, are heavily involved at the beginning of each quarter and at the end of each quarter. We also have kind of a mid-quarter touch point where we check in and see, hey, how we doing? Are we moving in the right direction, and so on. And then also, our director level, they are involved in our teams. I would say on a weekly or biweekly cadence, and that kind of filters up as well to business stakeholders. So um,
So,
yeah.
so just like you had the discovery track and the delivery track,
Mhm.
so when the business owners come into the picture, they come into the picture at the end of the quarter and then they just look at the validated ones in the Kanban board, or how exactly do they
Um,
interact?
yeah, so I would say it's much more kind of fluid than that. Like there's always kind of ongoing
Okay.
um, synchronization taking place. Um, so yeah, at the least some kind of monthly sync up with our head of product for sure. And then above him, I'd say 2-3 times a quarter, we'll
Okay.
have more in-depth
Okay.
syncing.
Sounds good. And they're interested both in the discovery as well as the delivery, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely are super transparent and communicate about both of those tracks as much as possible. In fact, we want our business stakeholders involved in discovery a lot.
Okay.
Um, I would say one thing maybe to highlight is, well, I lost it, but the team charter slide
Okay.
right here.
Yeah.
This is another sort of vehicle for synchronizing with business stakeholders. So they have a lot of input into this document.
Okay.
Um, and with this document, they're able to say, I, I really think you guys should move in this direction in general. Um, we want to be focused on this problem space, kind of,
Hmm.
and then from there we'll keep syncing them into discovery as well.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
And then we have one more question from Lucinda Kral. How have the engineers responded to being part of the discovery track? Have you had any resistance or some kind of response like, not my job, I just want to code, or, the how enthusiastic have the engineers been
Yep,
in
that's a great question. I would say in general, very positive. Um, the sense that I'm getting is uh, our engineers are appreciating being part of discovery as well because they are part of discovery. We have to have engineering input for anything to make it into delivery, so we need them to be in discovery. Um, the question about I just want to code, I would say when it comes to experimentation, well, I'll leave it. So, like I said, we use third-party tooling for experimentation. It's not super technical. It's a little bit technical. So that's something we're still trying to figure out is we need people who are technical enough to build and launch experiments. But for some of our really talented engineers who want to continue growing and be solving more complex architectural problems and things like this, experimentation might not be the right area for them to grow in. So we are still kind of trying to figure out what's the right role or right type of person to continually fill that technical seat in experimentation. Um, we still try to pull our engineers into the process. Uh, but yeah, we want them to be happy and we want them to grow in the way that they want to grow as well. So that's something we're figuring out.
Okay, sounds good. That's all the questions we had. Thanks a lot for the lovely talk. I really enjoyed the practical examples of how you went through the whole process.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
I think we are over ready for the next sessions. I hear from Clay that we had a hard stop at 2:40.